If you're going to do something, do it well. And leave something with you. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there. Have a good day.
Aún la mención de su nombre produce escalofríos. Charles Manson. Él y varios miembros de su familia están todavía cumpliendo cadena perpetua por los crímenes que tanto horrorizaron al mundo hace más de un cuarto de siglo. En una reacción de violencia, ellos asesinaron a 7 personas a sangre fría en 2 vecindarios de Los Ángeles. Aunque no cometió ninguno de los asesinatos, estaba claro que él era el jefe y autor intelectual. Así que hoy en Biografía veremos la vida de Charles Manson.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do.
I knew that people would die. I knew that there would be killing.
Our acts cannot be forgiven.
Every one of you out there has tried to kill me for the last 25 years, and I'm still here. Ha, ha, ha. Now what?
Charles Manson. Viaje a la maldad. El 8 de agosto de 1969, intrusos entraron a la casa del director Roman Polanski y su esposa embarazada, la actriz Sharon Tate, en Los Ángeles. La asesinaron a ella y a 4 más. La próxima noche invadieron otra casa y dieron muerte a un dueño de supermercados y a su esposa con igual brutalidad. En 2 días, toda la ciudad estaba aterrada. Pero pasaron meses antes de que lograra vincularse los crímenes. Cuando esto sucedió, un extraño personaje llamado Charles Manson fue acusado de provocar a sus aparentemente fanáticos seguidores a cometer los crímenes. Comenzó una obsesión nacional por comprender a esta gente. ¿Quién era Charles Manson? Según él lo recuerda, el dolor de su infancia comenzó a temprana edad.
I'm a street child. I'm a runaway little girl at 15 years old out of Kentucky named Kathleen Maddox. I didn't have a husband. My husband's name was Scott. And he married somebody else and went down the road, and she went to Cincinnati and had a guy named Charlie Manson.
Nació el 12 de noviembre de 1934 en Cincinnati, Ohio, en el Hospital General Chicago. Su madre, Kathleen Maddox, tenía 16 años y era soltera. Su padre era un tal coronel Scott, quien conocía desde hace muy poco tiempo a Kathleen.
She was very, very motherly looking. She was as motherly looking as my mother was.
My mother went to prison for 5 years for strong-arm robbery. Her brother had the dealer trick in off the street and put the yoke on him to get some money to eat.
But when I heard she was a prostitute, it just, I couldn't believe that either.
And she went to prison, and I used to visit her in the prison visiting room.
La ausencia y rechazo materno haría que el sueño constante de Manson durante su infancia fuera estar con ella. Manson pasó muchos de sus primeros años en el pequeño pueblo de McMacken, al oeste de Virginia, con su tío y su tía profundamente religiosos, viviendo, según las apariencias, una vida de pueblo bastante feliz.
The house was a big, older house, but it was beautiful. He had just about anything he wanted, I would say. His aunt and uncle and grandmother took him to church. He didn't like going. The only thing he really liked, was the singing. But Charles loved to sing.
Pero bastante de la educación temprana de Manson vino de otro tío, un hombre montañés.
Out of the Kentucky mountains, when my uncle said, "We ain't surrendered, we're still rebels, and we'll be rebels until the end of time, because I ain't accepting no Yankee school." He said, "Don't go to those schools, boy." So when I was 9 years old, I set the school on fire, and I went to reform school.
Entre 1942 y 1947, Manson vivió gran parte de su vida con su madre y sus muchos amantes en el oeste. Pero entonces, imposibilitada de colocarlo en un hogar adoptivo, dejó que la corte lo enviara a la escuela Gibault para jóvenes. 10 meses después se escapó y fue a buscarla, pero ella no lo quería de regreso. Este fue un hecho crucial para Charles Manson.
The only thing my mother taught me was that everything she said was a lie. And I learned never to believe anyone about anything.
Una vez más escapó de la escuela y comenzó una vida llena de crímenes menores, incluyendo hurtos nocturnos en automercados y robos de bicicletas. En 1949, saliendo de un reformatorio juvenil, fue enviado al famoso Boys Town del padre Flanagan. Un joven sin remedio que ha vivido en una calle ciega emocional hoy se encuentra feliz. Va para el Boys Town. Manson se fugó 4 días después. Ahora, con 13 años, robaba autos, robaba tiendas y cometía sus primeros asaltos a mano armada. Entonces fue enviado a la escuela indiana para jóvenes, donde él dice que fue violado y golpeado constantemente. Escapó de allí 18 veces. Ahora las sentencias aumentaban por estar robando autos, cometiendo asaltos a mano armada y robos a estaciones de servicio. Fue a la Escuela Nacional de Entrenamiento para Jóvenes, al campamento en Natural Bridge, a reformatorios en Petersburg, Virginia y Chillicothe, Ohio, de donde fue liberado en 1954. Él tenía solo 19 años. Para esta época en Los Ángeles, una de sus futuras seguidoras, Patricia Krenwinkel, era apenas una pequeña niña. Su cómoda infancia no pudo haber sido más distinta a la de Manson, pero en el hogar de ella también había tristeza.
During the time I was brought up, nothing was talked about. I mean, my parents' dissolution of their marriage, you don't talk about that. You don't talk about problems in the home. I never felt like I had a sense of who I really wanted to be or become.
En 1949, Leslie Van Houten nació en una estable familia clase media en Altadena, California. Desde una edad temprana, ella quería ayudar al mundo. Sus padres también se divorciaron.
I was always very a creative girl, young girl, you know, artistic. But I never, for a while, I wanted to be a school teacher. Somewhere along the line, I got distracted and I lost motivation. Believe that I was desperately seeking someone that I could love and hold on to and call my own. That somehow my dad leaving had left a space there.
En 1955, en enero, Charles Manson, de 20 años, se casa con Rosalie Jim Willis, de 17 años. Él realizaba trabajos temporales, pero seguía robando autos y llevándolos a otros estados.
1944, I went to juvenile hall. I didn't get out till 1954. I got a little girl named Rose, stole some guns, went to Georgia, burglarized a store, got a straw hat full of dimes, and came to L.A. I turned 21 years old in the L.A. County Jail. I wasn't out but a hot second. I've been in jail all my life.
Era uno de los hechos curiosos sobre Charles Manson. Con frecuencia lograba cometer crímenes poco serios que violaban leyes federales y que traían sentencias severas. Una sentencia suspendida se extendió a 10 años porque Manson se escapó mientras cumplía condena por forjar un cheque de tesorería por un monto irrisorio.
I was struck by something initially, and that is that he had been sentenced to 10 years for attempting to cash a $43 treasury check, and he did 7.5 years.
Desde 1951 hasta 1967, el expediente criminal de Charles Manson muestra una variedad de crímenes, desde robo postal hasta falsificación y prostitución. En la prisión de McNeil Island desarrolló cierta habilidad con la guitarra, la cual jugaría una parte importante en algunos eventos posteriores. El hombre que le enseñó a tocar era un viejo compañero de prisión, el conocido gángster Alvin Espantoso Karpis. Fue también en prisión, con sus rígidos códigos de comportamiento y jerarquía, donde Manson desarrolló su particular manera de ver el mundo.
See, I never realized that people outside are much different than the people inside. People inside, if you lie, you get punched. You get misused. You don't lie to the lieutenant. Lieutenant don't lie to you. There's a certain amount of truth in prison, and being raised in prison, I was raised pretty much in the light of that truth.
He did his own time. He pretty much refused to be programmed to go along with the expectations of the prison staff. He apparently spent a lot of time in his cell playing the guitar, writing music. He did attend a class, did very well in a power of positive thinking class, which I always thought was a part of his style.
Fue liberado de prisión en 1967. Se ha dicho que él pidió no ser puesto en libertad, ya que había pasado más de 16 de sus 32 años preso y la cárcel era el único hogar que conocía. Además, Charles Manson nunca había experimentado vivir con una familia de verdad. Eso haría muy atractiva la idea de una familia propia. La cárcel representaba una vida de poco cambio para Manson, pero su vida en el exterior cambiaría radicalmente. El mundo era muy distinto ahora del que él había conocido antes de prisión, y era uno en el cual sus habilidades le servirían muy bien. En los años 60, el distrito Haight-Ashbury de San Francisco era para los hippies y otros rebeldes del sistema la tierra prometida.
What we saw at its peak were literally thousands of flower children all over the country, all over the world, attracted to this movement, like moths to a flame, you know, summer in San Francisco. There was a philosophy here that was totally revolutionary that they'd not heard before, and this was the epicenter of it. A lot of very young, creative, exploring people came there, but then you started to see a shift where more disturbed, sicker, more drug-involved people started to come.
Las drogas alucinógenas como el LSD estaban siendo reemplazadas por estimulantes más fuertes, particularmente por la llamada speed, que podía ocasionar compulsión y paranoia. La inocencia se convertía en violencia.
You may recall a song, the lyrics of which were, if you come to San Francisco, you better wear a flower in your hair. By 1967, if you came to San Francisco, you needed to wear a 45 in your belt. It had changed that fast. The kids were still coming from all over the United States with the same set of expectations, but the welcoming committee was very, very different. There was a brand of street theater that was hard to imagine.
If we are coming up to the beatnik area, all the stores out in this area, been taken over by the beatniks, and we see them in all shapes and sizes. I think this one is a girl walking in front of us. She has a hair ribbon, but it's hard to tell.
It was a scene where if you grew your hair and talked the talk, you fit in.
Esta fue la atmósfera en la cual entró Manson al salir de prisión en 1967.
When he came out, he initially told me that there was nothing I could do, that that he could go back to prison. He was not afraid of it. He was not going to do parole if parole was going to be onerous. He was clearly an antisocial personality. He was superficial, he was glib, and he was very adaptable.
And when I got out, all your children would come to me because they never had anybody to tell them the truth.
He sized up people, I think, fairly quickly and fairly accurately. I think that's a skill you learn in prisons.
He said, so your father just kicked you out of the house. And that started it.
Lynette Shillona Fromm pronto se unió al clan Manson.
It was easy to talk to him. And we talked on a number of levels. His mind intrigued me.
Charlie was what he needed to be at any given time.
Pat Kregwinkel fue otro miembro fundador de la familia Manson.
I met Charlie when I was living at the beach with my sister, and she came home and said to go down to a friend's house, which I did, and Charlie was there, and he was playing the guitar. And so I was introduced to him there. And that night, we slept together, and I felt really loved by him almost immediately, mostly because I think at that point I was really desperate for someone to care. When we made love, all I remember is just crying and crying to this man. I mean, it was like, because he said, oh, you're beautiful. I couldn't believe that. I just started crying.
La familia Manson también adoptó hombres. Uno de ellos fue el joven tejano tradicional Charles Tex Watson.
Charlie used sex for, number one, when people would come and he wanted power over them, men, he would offer them whatever women he had. And he had certain women he always put out front, which he called his front street girls. They were the ones that he thought were the most beautiful, the ones that would be the most enticing. And that's what he would do. I mean, he was an excellent pimp.
Charles Manson no solo seguía atrayendo seguidores, sino que también comenzaba a ejercer un poder mucho mayor.
Whatever he believed, I would believe. And I would say, and I would spout off.
I began to get increasingly uncomfortable with the amount of control and the way in which he used them. And you could see his sense of power and control growing.
Pero al menos en California, la familia era vigilada por agentes externos.
I saw him on a weekly basis. He would bring the girls into the office. It was a big occasion. I would go out to a home and see them. There was always that string. There was always some reality.
La familia abandonó San Francisco en el verano de 1967 y comenzó una odisea a lo largo de la costa californiana. Para mantener a sus seguidores entretenidos por suficiente tiempo, Manson los llevaba de lugar en lugar. Comenzaron a pasar mucho más tiempo en el área de Los Ángeles. Ahí Manson soñaba con hacerse un nombre en el mundo del rock and roll.
I think he felt that once he got down there, things were going to be very, very different. He had contacts with the Beach Boys.
A través de sus mujeres, Manson hizo contacto con Dennis Wilson de los Beach Boys. En Los Ángeles, Wilson recogió a las dos hermanas y las llevó a su casa. Pronto aparecieron Manson y el resto de la familia y se mudaron con Wilson por varios meses. Entonces, con Wilson y su amigo el productor Terry Melcher, Manson hizo algunas grabaciones, pero siempre le frustró el hecho de que su música permaneciera anónima.
They came to the ranch, lady. I didn't go to them, they came to me. You're stealing my music every day. You're writing my songs, you're playing my game.
En agosto de 1968, la hermana Susan Atkins encontró un nuevo hogar para la familia. Un antiguo estudio de cine convertido en establo, propiedad del octogenario y casi ciego llamado George Span. Leslie Van Houten se unió a la familia en 1968.
You know, all very fun in the beginning, innocent.
Al principio la familia vivió feliz en el destartalado estudio. Jugaban a interpretar personajes de viejas películas. Era como un campamento vacacional y Manson era el director.
It was a great place, actually. We could make anything we wanted out of it. It was like having the Our Gang set, you know. You could turn it into anything.
The whole idea was to let time disappear. There was no time. We were all living now. Now was the only time.
See, at first the magical mystery tour was that we would be cowboys or gypsies or pirates, and every day it was to wear a different role so that we would get more out of ourselves, and every day was Halloween.
Perder la conciencia, destruir viejos egos y reemplazarlos con el ideal de Manson y su muy particular visión del mundo era la verdadera meta de toda esta actuación dirigida por él mismo.
If you wipe away somebody's identity, say society is corrupt, forget about everything you ever learned, but then you substitute your own philosophy, it's like wiping the blackboard clean and then introducing your philosophy, and then you become the absolute leader.
Poco a poco, la familia Manson se hacía más fuerte.
One of his things was to stop you during the day, and he'd put your palms up to his, and then he'd move them in any direction that he could. Or he'd make a series of faces, and then you were supposed to try to keep up with them. And the whole thing was always geared toward just complete mirroring of him.
Una poderosa manera de Manson para mantener el control era con drogas, especialmente LSD.
Well, we took hundreds of trips together.
Los viajes psicodélicos eran ejercicios de manipulación total.
With Charlie, he actually did almost like drug programming. I mean, he was the focal point at all times. And what seems so amazing is that he somehow, because acid is a very powerful drug, and it's like, I would feel like totally out of control, and yet I would watch him and he would seem totally in control. One of the things, when I look back, I realized I didn't always see him take acid. I don't think he did. The idea was to get rid of all the conditioning, to die in yourself. So he would hold you up and say something to you. Say, see, I can see your mother on you. It's still the conditioning. You know, you haven't gotten rid of it. You're not dead yet.
Sometimes he would reenact the crucifixion when we were on LSD. And it was very realistic. I would die for you. And then the questions would begin. Would you die for me?
Pero ¿cuál era la filosofía de Manson? Esta había comenzado con una noción de unidad y alabanzas al poder del amor, pero al pasar el tiempo empezó a transformarse en paranoia. Los mensajes a la familia se volvían cada vez más confusos. No existía el bien o el mal. La vida y la muerte eran realmente la misma cosa. De hecho, la muerte podía ser un paso correcto en camino a un mundo mejor. En el otoño e invierno de 1968, mientras Manson se veía más y más como predicador solitario, él y la familia pasaban más y más tiempo en un lugar que solo aumentaba su sensación de soledad. Un remoto campamento en el Valle de la Muerte.
We really weren't in touch. We were allowed to listen to the Beatles and the Moody Blues and Manson's music.
Sin embargo, Manson estaba al tanto de los acontecimientos en las ciudades norteamericanas. En el año de 1966 surgieron disturbios en los vecindarios negros de las ciudades más importantes. El clamor del poder negro se hacía sentir al tiempo que se adoptaban medidas más fuertes contra la guerra de Vietnam.
Because if America don't come round, America should be burnt down.
La familia regresó a Los Ángeles en enero de 1969. La paranoia aumentó en julio cuando Manson creyó haber matado a un traficante negro que él creyó miembro de los Panteras Negras. Convencido de que ya la furia total de las Panteras Negras se volcaría pronto sobre la familia, amargado con su fracaso en el área musical y sobre todo seguro de que había una gran guerra racial a las puertas, Charles Manson pasó julio y agosto tenso y enojado. La noche del 9 de agosto de 1969, en una casa en Cielo Drive, en Los Ángeles, la actriz Sharon Tate, esposa del director de cine Roman Polanski, con 8 meses de embarazo, estaba en casa con sus amigos el peluquero Jay Sembrin, la millonaria Abigail Folger y el señor Wojtek Frykowski. Un joven llamado Stephen Parent también estaba en casa visitando a la empleada doméstica. Los asesinatos comenzaron con algunos preparativos en el rancho Span.
I was with the children. We were in a trailer. I was with someone else, and we were in a trailer. And Charlie came and woke me up. And he said, "Get up. I want you to go somewhere." He said, "Get in the car." And I was in the car with Tex and Linda Kasabian and Susan Atkins. And he said, "Do everything that Tex says." And we were off.
Tex Watson fue el primero en entrar a la casa. Cuando se consiguió a Stephen Parent sentado en su auto, le disparó 4 veces.
We heard gunshots. He came back and told us to come with him. And we followed. Trying to get into the house, he eventually, I think he went through a window or something, returned to a front door and allowed the rest of us to enter. There was a man that he was dealing with, and I think that was Jay Sebring, I believe. He had him on the floor or something, and he was going to tie him up. And he asked Susan to check the back rooms. And what began to happen is a scuffle started taking place between Tex and the man and Jay Sebring, and he shot him, and everyone else at that point obviously was getting really frightened and scared. And what eventually took place is that there was an attempt to tie everyone up, and when there was an attempt to tie everyone up, eventually Abigail Folger started to get herself undone, and she took off. I ran after her with an upraised knife, and we went out through a back door out onto the lawn. And I started stabbing her. I ran her down, and I began to stab her. I remember her saying, "I'm already dead."
Fue Tex Watson quien dio la mayoría de los golpes fatales en la casa esa noche.
We were so locked in, it's just okay, this must be this, and when you just become more in more like a robot, like somehow this must bring it.
Los resultados fueron terribles. Había sangre por todo el lugar. Una cuerda amarrada 2 veces alrededor del cuello de Sharon Tate, lanzada sobre una viga y amarrada al cuello de Jay Sebring. Folger y Frykowski estaban en el césped. Stephen Parent estaba muerto en su auto. En la puerta principal, escrita con sangre de Tate, estaba la palabra cerdo. Aparte de presentar múltiples balazos y golpes, las víctimas fueron acuchilladas un total de 102 veces.
When I got back to the ranch, we got out of the car, Charlie came up and asked everybody how it went. But that was the first time I looked at him and I said, Charlie, they were so young. And he just said, go with Tex.
La noche siguiente hubo otro ataque. Esta vez fue en la casa del empresario de automercados Leno LaBianca y su esposa Rosemary en una sección muy distinta a la de Los Ángeles. Manson conocía la casa porque había ido a una fiesta en una casa vecina ese mismo año. En esta segunda aventura los acompañó Leslie Van Houten, ansiosa de probar su lealtad a Manson.
I knew that people would die. I knew that there would be killing.
Manson, Van Houten, Krenwinkel, Watson, Atkins y Linda Kasabian dieron vueltas por un rato antes de detenerse en la casa de los LaBianca. Manson entró, ató a los LaBianca y se marchó.
Pat had a knife, and I tried to hold Mrs. LaBianca down, and I couldn't do it. And Pat went to stab her, and she couldn't do it.
Leslie was still trying to hold her because she was struggling, and I went and got Tex.
And Tex went into the bedroom, and I stood in the hallway, and I looked into an empty room in the den, and I just stayed there, and I didn't move. And I have no sound memory of Mrs. LaBianca dying. All I remember is staring into that room. And then Tex turned me around and handed me the knife, and he said, do something. Because Manson had told him to make sure that all of us got our hands dirty. And I stabbed Mrs. LaBianca in the lower back about 16 times.
La escena del segundo crimen no fue menos macabra que la de la primera noche. Había un tenedor de cocina clavado en el estómago de Leno LaBianca, un cuchillo en su garganta y la palabra guerra escrita en su piel. La señora LaBianca estaba en su habitación, su cabeza cubierta con una caja y un cable amarrado alrededor de su cuello. En las paredes, escrito con sangre, las palabras muerte a los cerdos y asciende. Y en la puerta del refrigerador, las palabras helter skelter, caos y confusión.
I said, if you're gonna do something, leave something witchy. Just like I would tell you, if you're gonna do something, do it well. And leave something witchy. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there. Have a good day.
Las 2 víctimas habían sido apuñaladas un total de 67 veces. Simultáneamente, las noticias de la primera noche sacudían Los Ángeles como un terremoto.
There was a terrible fear, a terrible trepidation on the part of the Hollywood community that this killing, this ritualistic killing, had something to do with celebrityism. And so a lot of the high-profile Hollywood stars, apparently Sinatra left town. Tony Bennett was living at the Beverly Hills Hotel in one of the bungalows. He moved inside to be safe. Steve McQueen supposedly drove around with a gun in the front seat of a car now, all reacting to the Sharon Tate killings.
It was amazing. Everyone's got a piece of the story. Everywhere you went, there was somebody saying, did you know that they found that thing? And that, you know.
En esos días, toda California parecía querer una pistola. Una tienda de Beverly Hills logró vender 200 armas en 2 días. Conseguir un herrero tomaba de 1 a 2 semanas. La policía interrogaba a muchos famosos y algunos de ellos comenzaron a tener cuidado. Una persona del mundo del cine dijo, todos los inodoros en Beverly Hills están ocupados. Los Ángeles está asustado. Ahora comenzaban a circular los rumores.
The first rumor that hit, as far as the crimes were concerned, was that it was drug-related. it was a drug hit. And on top of that, it was Roman Polanski's wife. People knew about Polanski's film, Knife in the Water, all of these strange, dark, mystical movies involving drugs and sex and killings.
Sharon not only didn't use drugs. In the beginning, you know, there were those who thought Roman had an involvement in this.
Fueron conjeturas que Polanski rápidamente desmintió.
It's terrible for him when he came back for the funeral. And Warren Beatty was telling me this. I mean, people thought he somehow had something to do, which of course he didn't.
Aunque eran obvias las similitudes que existían entre los ataques a las familias Tate y La Bianca, la policía creía que el segundo crimen era solamente una copia basada en la publicidad dada al primero. De hecho, ambas investigaciones se realizaron separadamente. Durante las pesquisas, la familia fue arrestada por una acusación de robo de automóvil y liberada inmediatamente. Se dirigieron entonces hacia el norte, a la seguridad del rancho Parker. El 10 de octubre, la familia fue arrestada otra vez por nuevas acusaciones de robo y fraude. Y mientras estaban en la cárcel, afloró la historia de los asesinatos. La hermana Susan Atkins fue implicada por otro miembro en un crimen anterior. Presa en Los Ángeles, le contó a los reos acerca de los asesinatos. Mientras más asesinas, más te gusta hacerlo, les dijo. Uno de los reos le contó la historia a la policía. En diciembre de 1969, 4 meses después de los crímenes, Charles Manson y 5 miembros de la familia fueron acusados por los asesinatos Tate La Bianca. Lo que algunos llamaron el crimen del siglo, ahora se transformaba en un juicio que hipnotizaría a la nación. El juicio de Charles Manson, Pat Grewinkel, Leslie Van Houten y Susan Atkins por los asesinatos Tate y La Bianca comenzaron el 15 de julio de 1970. Manson pidió permiso para ser su propio abogado, lo cual le fue negado. Aún así, siempre estuvo claro que Manson tenía total control de la defensa.
You have to realize that I viewed Manson as being the main defendant. To convict his co-defendants and have him walk out of court, I think, would have been an unsuccessful prosecution. The problem was that Manson was not at the murder scene. He did not physically participate in these murders. So I had to bring him in by way of circumstantial evidence, and also by the law of conspiracy.
El corazón del caso de la fiscalía era la extraña historia del Helter Skelter, la extraña fantasía apocalíptica que Charles Manson había tejido con una gran seguridad de que estallaría una guerra racial. Helter Skelter provenía del nombre de una canción de los Beatles.
Manson envisioned that white people would turn against the black man if they thought the black man had committed these 7 murders, and ultimately there would be a civil war between blacks and whites out on the street. During the war, he told them, he said, we're going to hide out in the bottomless pit in the desert, a place he derived from Revelation 9, a chapter in the last book of the New Testament. Manson foresaw that the black man would win this war. But later on, he said the black man, because of inexperience, would simply not be able to handle the reins of power. So we would have to look around at those white people who had survived, who had escaped from Helter Skelter. And he said, we'll come out of the bottomless pit, and quoting Manson, we'll send Blackie on his way to picking cotton, and we'll take over the leadership of the world.
La principal testigo era Linda Kasabian, quien había conducido el auto durante la noche de los asesinatos. Ella acordó testificar a cambio de inmunidad. En la corte y en todos Los Ángeles se sentía una atmósfera tan extraña como los mismos acusados.
It may be more than 6 months before the Tate case finally goes to trial here at the Hall of Justice, but Hollywood isn't waiting. 2 movies about the mass murders already are in the works. One producer said his film will concentrate on the hippie clan charged with murder and explain on the screen why they might have done it.
Día tras día, Manson iba al tribunal y, utilizando sus trucos, intimidaba y divertía.
He was playing the people. He was playing to the courtroom. He was playing to the press.
We had quite a few staring sessions. He was always staring at people. You know, he'd stare at the jury, and they would turn away. He'd turn around and stare at spectators.
Durante el juicio, tal como ocurría en su vida diaria, las 3 mujeres seguían todas las órdenes de Manson.
The entire proceedings were scripted by Charlie. Every day we'd meet, and he'd decide, well, today I want you each to stand up and hold your hands in some stupid symbols. You're going to get up and scream. You know, each day was scripted. And that day we proceeded through the events. With Manson, he believed that everything we did was creating some picture that was going to go out in the universe and somehow change it bend it towards his will.
La marcha diaria de Van Houten, Atkins y Kreiwinkel, sonriendo y cantando, era enfadosa para quienes la vieran en las noticias. La canción que cantaban había sido compuesta por Manson. Tras numerosas interrupciones del juicio, el resto de los miembros de la familia fueron expulsados del tribunal, así que se mudaron a los pasillos y mantuvieron vigilia afuera. Al principio, el ánimo era casi festivo.
We saw them every day, you know. Come on, Squeaky, you can't really be serious about that, you know. And we would banter back and forth, and so there was a joviality.
Pero tratando de impresionar al jurado, Manson escribió una X en su frente con un cuchillo, simbolizando su retiro de la sociedad. La semana siguiente, las 3 mujeres lo copiaron. La atención sobre el juicio ocasionó intervenciones no beneficiosas de altos niveles. El presidente Nixon habló sobre Manson en uno de sus discursos.
Here is a man who was guilty, directly or indirectly, of 8 murders without reason. Here is a man yet who, as far as the coverage was concerned, appeared to be rather a glamorous figure.
Al día siguiente, un sonriente Charles Manson le mostró el titular al jurado, mientras la defensa pedía la anulación del juicio. Esta fue negada a pesar de los esfuerzos de la defensa. Dentro del tribunal, el momento más dramático ocurrió el 5 de octubre de 1970. Manson saltó 3 metros hacia el juez. Fue sometido y el juicio continuó. El 16 de noviembre, la Fiscalía y la defensa tomaron un descanso. No se llamó a un solo testigo. Los frecuentes cambios en la defensa ocasionaban muchos problemas. También hubo gran desconcierto cuando el abogado defensor Ronald Hughes no se presentó al tribunal. Su cuerpo fue descubierto después en las afueras de la ciudad. Un exmiembro de la familia dijo posteriormente que fue asesinado por desacuerdos con Manson sobre la defensa de Van Houten. El 25 de enero de 1971, tras 9 días de deliberaciones, el jurado encontró a cada uno de los acusados culpables de homicidio en primer grado. En un juicio separado, Tex Watson también fue encontrado culpable y sentenciado a muerte. Cuando llegó el momento de la sentencia, las mujeres testificaron y trataron de exonerar a Manson. Ahora cambiaban las instrucciones de Manson.
One of the things that Charlie always promoted about himself was, I don't lie. And all of a sudden, he was asking every one of us to lie on a daily basis about something. Oh, say this, say that. And we're going, but I didn't do that. And it was like, you lie? A God lies?
El 29 de marzo, el jurado propuso al juez la pena de muerte para todos. El juez siguió la recomendación. En protesta, las mujeres se cortaron el cabello.
Before that clerk reads that verdict, you don't know what he's going to say, life or death. It's a very tense, suspenseful moment. And I looked over at Manson, and his hands were trembling. Now, here's someone who always spoke about the beauty of death. He was always telling everyone, death is a beautiful thing, and maybe when we kill these people, we're doing them a favor, and they don't even realize it. But I was with him for 9.5 months, and he fought very hard for his own life, see? So that was just pure hypocrisy on his part.
Ahora los acusados estaban condenados a muerte. Para algunos de ellos era una especie de alivio.
I was more than willing to go to the gas chamber. I didn't fear it. The death penalty for me at the time it almost justified my not having to deal with what I had done. It was the eye for an eye. They're going to kill me. I don't have to deal with it.
En 1972, la Corte Suprema derogó la pena capital. Todas las sentencias fueron cambiadas a cadena perpetua. En el caso de Charles Manson, hubo un cierto elemento irónico.
In fact, he told me after the trial, because Bugliosi says, you know, you haven't achieved anything here. He said, all you've done is send me back to where I came from. But I said, well, yeah, Charlie, that's true, but as far as I know, you've never been in the green room before. The green room is a reference to San Quentin gas chamber. The next year, I was driving my car, and the car radio was on. And I heard where the U.S. Supreme Court had set aside the death penalty, Furman versus Georgia. And the very first thought that came to my mind is that what Manson had told me at the end of the trial was true. That all we did is send him back to where he came from, and he doesn't mind prison life. So in a sense, and I hate to say this, in a sense, Manson has beaten the rap.
Esto fue en 1972. Pat Grewinkel y Leslie Van Houten todavía eran mujeres jóvenes, con una vida por delante, una vida para asumir lo que ellas habían hecho. Más de 25 años después de los asesinatos de Tate y la Bianca, Charles Manson, Patricia Grewinkel, Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins y Tex Williams están todavía en prisión cumpliendo cadena perpetua. Todos han pedido libertad bajo fianza numerosas veces, pero nunca se les ha otorgado. Manson ni siquiera asiste a todas sus audiencias de libertad condicional. Hoy Charles Manson tiene más de 60 años. Ted Watson y las mujeres están en sus 40. Escuchar a Manson, Grewinkel y Van Houten hablar hoy en día es oír recuerdos muy distintos de los eventos ocurridos hace un cuarto de siglo.
If anything, the older I get, the harder it is. Mrs. LaBianca was younger than I am now. I took away all that life.
I see blood in here every day. Every day someone's getting shot, someone's getting cut, someone's getting beat. I've lived in that all my life, woman. That don't wrinkle up my forehead. You can pile 100 dead bodies up in front of my cell and it don't set me to do nothing.
Every day I wake up and know that I'm a destroyer of the most precious thing, which is life. And living with that is the most difficult thing of all. And I do that because that's what I deserve, is to wake up every morning and know that.
You know, it didn't happen overnight. He spent a lot of time taking middle-class girls and remolding them.
I never broke nobody's will. I never told anybody to do anything other than what they wanted to do.
Oh, Charlie's just absolutely lying. There wasn't one thing done that was even allowed to be done without his expressed permission.
Wait a minute. I said, you do what's best for you. You do what you feel is right. You do what you think is right. Now, whatever you think is right, it's got to be right. All I'm doing is I'm walking with you, I'm walking the line with you, and I'm holding the line with you. What you do is up to you. It's got nothing to do with me.
You know, I take offense to the fact that 25 years later, Manson doesn't own up to his share in this. I take offense to that. I take responsibility for my part. And part of my responsibility was helping create him.
Every once in a while I get letters from children. And they seem to think that what we did is all right. There is nothing that we did that is all right. Nothing.
He was not Jesus Christ or Satan. He was a very odd, bizarre, high-energy little antisocial who had some poor, confused, middle-class dropouts who decided to follow him. And he got into a situation where he had enormous power over these people, and he pulled it all together into this incoherent, hateful kind of plan. And there was no one there to say, Charlie, girls, this is crazy.
Desde el juicio en 1971, 8 veces se le ha negado la libertad a Manson. Su próxima audiencia es en abril de 1997.